Hello, I'm Mike,
And I'm Fran.
and you're listening to Mike and Fran Unrehearsed on 216 The Net, real life internet radio, Wednesdays at noon on 216thenet.com. First off, I'd like to thank you very much for tuning in and for all the questions you guys are submitting. We're getting some really good ones, and we're going to try to hit a couple more than we usually do today to get kind of caught up. And as always, if you have more questions, please send them to 216thenet at gmail.com. So, Mom, how you doing today?
Very well, thank you.
Great, great. I wanted to first of all mention one thing from last week's show on Hiroshima. I did mention that when I went to SIU, I studied engineering, and I was lucky enough to have a Japanese student as my roommate who already had an engineering degree and really helped me with my studies tremendously. And I invited some of these guys to come back home with us for the holidays because they never had a chance to experience American Thanksgiving, and most of them went back home. And Tetsuro was nice enough to make our family one of his favorite Japanese meals, sukiyaki, and he calls it skiyaki. So if you mention sukiyaki to anybody that's Japanese, you have to say sukiyaki, and they go, "Oh, you're real Japanese." Well, maybe not, but at least you can say sukiyaki the right way. Anyway, sukiyaki is basically paper thin beef, some bok choy or some napa cabbage, some onions. You put it in sort of a skillet, and you put in maybe a cup or so of soy sauce. And then Tetsuro started adding a little bit of powdered sugar. And I'm like, "Are you sure you want to put powdered sugar in there?" And he goes, "I'm Japanese. I know how to make sukiyaki." I'm like, "Oh, okay, okay." And you know what? He knew what he was doing, and it tasted great. In fact, I made it here a couple days ago, Mom. How did you like it?
It was very good.
Oh, I'm glad. I'm glad you liked it. A little white rice, you know. You got your rice cooker, makes the rice perfect every time, and a little sukiyaki. But one of the funny things about sukiyaki is when the beef is gone, you only got vegetables. And so I was in the Mitsuya Japanese shopping mall over there in Arlington Heights, and I was shopping around. I was looking for some sushi rice vinegar, I guess it was. And I had to ask a couple there where it was because I couldn't read it. It was all in Japanese, and they found it for me. And I asked them, I go, "Yeah, you know, I like to make sukiyaki at home. My roommate taught me how to make it. And what happens when you run out of the meat? Does that happen to you?" And they go, "Ha ha ha, we run out of the meat too. No more beef. What do you do? Only vegetable." And I'm like, "Yeah, what do you do?" "Oh, you buy more beef, I guess, or you just kind of suffer with just the vegetables." I thought that was funny, and she goes, "Ha ha ha, yeah, I'm Japanese. I know. You might run out of beef with sukiyaki." And I'm like, "Oh, that's a different kind of I'm Japanese. That's like, I'm Japanese, so, you know, I should know this. Not like, I'm Japanese and all Japanese know this. You know what I mean?" Anyway, I'm Japanese. So there's two different ways to say that. And I think it's great. Anyway, we love to tune into the NHK program on 377 on Comcast and learn about all of these different types of recipes. And I try them out on Mom. And, you know, if they're good, she'll tell me. And if they're bad, she'll tell me that too.
That's for sure fact.
Okay, Mom. So one of the first questions we've had here in the books that we're going to kind of rattle through a few of them here and get going and getting caught up on our questions is when Fran went to school, wasn't that when they were teaching that the world was flat? I guess that's kind of a silly question, but we're going to answer it.
Well, it's kind of a joke question. I certainly wasn't in Christopher Columbus's time. So
No, and I think when
I didn't think you'd sail on the ocean and fall off.
when he sailed, I think it was to see that the world was not flat. Wasn't that?
Yeah.
Wasn't that right?
That's right. one of the explorers proving that.
All right, Fran. So here's another question. It's actually to both of us. Have either of you tried to eat like Brits with a fork in the left hand and a knife in the right hand?
Well, yes, I have. When my mother and I were traveling in the 80s, 70s, 90s, we were in England several times, and we became accustomed and really liked using your knife in your right hand and your fork in your left and eating. It was more reasonable. It was easier to do, we felt. And then we came back home, and I would keep doing it, and my husband would say, "What are you doing?" And then, no, forgot about it. But I liked it, yes.
Well, I remember growing up. Basically, you use a fork in the right and a knife in the left. But when you're cutting meat, you put the fork in the left and the knife in the right. And then when you're done eating it, you switch back to actually eat the piece of meat that you cut, right? I mean, that's what you taught us, I guess.
Well, yes, that was American way.
That's the normal way to do it. Now, when I grew up, I was going to a Catholic school for a while, Queen of the Rosary, and I was left-handed. And they didn't have any left-handed desks there. And Dad said to me, "No kid of mine is going to be left-handed." And I go, "Uh-oh." So I got kind of switched up a little bit. And I actually, to this day, will right lefty, and I'll throw lefty, and everything else is righty. I bat righty, I golf righty, I might bowl lefty, but I think that's about it, like 3 things. But I consider myself left-handed. And think about it, if you're sitting around at a table, a dining room table, and you're eating with your left hand, it's just really hard to sit next to somebody that eats with their right hand.
My mother was always left-handed.
Well, that's right. And actually, both my grandmothers were left-handed, and me. And I think Alyssa's left-handed too, or no? Ryan. No, I don't know. Anyway, me and my 2 grandmas. I'll take it. All right, Mom. So here's another question. If we were driving to a destination and you came to a dead end or a roadblock, which of you two would accept the blame? Now, first of all, I would say that if we're driving these days, I usually drive, right? And I usually use a GPS if we're driving somewhere that's new, but for the most part, we're driving to places that we're familiar with. And if we do get lost, it's because of maybe a conversation we're having or something on the radio, or we get maybe carried away in the car and we forget where we're at. And then all of a sudden, I'm looking around going, "Did I pass it up?" And you'll say, "Well, you're driving. You must know where you're going." And then we'll drive a little bit more and I'll say, "I passed it up, didn't I?" And then you'll say, "Yeah, I told you we passed it up way back there." And I'm like, "Well, why didn't you tell me?" "Well, you're driving. You should know where you're going." And we have that little argument all the time. And then eventually I have to suck it up and turn around because, yeah, I had no idea where I was going. So anyway.
Well, usually when I was driving with your father, he would be the driver and I'd be the navigator. And it would always, if we were wrong, it was my fault then.
Nice.
Usually.
Well, I guess that's fair in those days, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But we had maps and those kind of things.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember traveling in the car on vacation, and the kids were always getting excited about the Holiday Inn sign, because then we know we'd be going to a hotel and a pool and a restaurant. "Where's the Holiday Inn sign? I don't see one. Is that a Holiday Inn sign?" Mm-hmm. In those days, I remember some of those funny gas stations like Sinclair and, the little dinosaur out there front. Oh my God, I'm really, really aging myself now. But anyway, traveling with 5 kids in a station wagon was a lot of fun. And we used to have one station wagon where the seats faced the back, and then they faced each other, and then we had a little space in between the seats. I don't think it was really meant for kids to sit in there, but we were little enough that we did sit in there, and we would keep our comic books in there and play little games on the road to kind of pass the time. You remember?
Well, in fact, I think one of the questions you were going to get to was about what decade of my life did I really like?
Yes, Mom, you're right. And the question actually was, what was your favorite decade of life so far and why?
I would not say it was my favorite, but it was one that I look back on very warmly. Is the first 10 years of my life when we had 5 kids in 10 years, and we traveled. We'd go to the East Coast every year in a wagon and go out to Oregon maybe every 4 or 5 years. It's a much longer trip.
Right.
But we would go to the New Jersey and go to the shore and have a great time. It was so much fun. The kids were all little. We got along so well with all of the Italian relatives. There were so many of them, like 120, that we would go visit. And as I said, the kids weren't as thrilled with having to spend a week visiting, but we all loved it down at the shore.
Yeah,
And I just remember that as being a great period. And I loved being with the kids and like mothers say today, oh, I'm tired. Where is my downtime? You didn't. You were a mother. You were a wife. This didn't occur to you then. This was your life. It's what you did. That was great.
Yeah.
The only thing that I can remember that was a drawback is when we were coming back from New Jersey. Vincent was a baby, my youngest of 5. He was about a year in diapers. And we were driving on the turnpike in Pennsylvania, and we were eating M&Ms, passing M&Ms around. And somehow I found a little brown one, put it in my mouth, and all of a sudden, oh my God, it wasn't. It was a piece of Vincent's BM that had come out, one little pebble kind had come out of his diaper.
What was he, a rabbit?
Well, it wasn't pleasant. I'm pointing in my mouth, couldn't talk, and everybody didn't know what was going on. I think I spit some out in a Kleenex and then get me to the nearest Howard Johnson so I can drink. We didn't carry water in the car in those days, so he sped as fast as he could while I'm choking there.
Just pull over to the side of the road
No,
anywhere.
it didn't occur to us. He didn't pull over.
That's ridiculous.
He was going to the Howard Johnsons,
Stick
and
your head
I
out the
was
window
getting
and
some water.
Spit it out.
So I ran in and got water. And I said, well, that was a pretty... the kids just thought it was hilarious. How could you do that, Mother? And it was an accident.
So I'm going to say this. Shit happens.
It surely did in this case.
Oh my God. Mom, you mentioned Howard Johnson's, and I remember being in the car and kind of cooped up in the back there. It was kind of hot, you're kind of bored, you take a nap, you're getting sweaty, you have to go to the bathroom. And Dad, I want to stop. Dad. And of course, Dad couldn't stop for 1 kid or 2 kids, so you'd have to wait till like maybe 3 kids, or maybe one of the adults needed to stop. So sometimes it was a long ride before we were able to stop. And you're sitting there in the back. So I remember we had to go to the bathroom. Dad, when are we going to stop? Finally, we pull up at a Howard Johnson's, and Dad goes to the back to open the gate to let us out. And he goes, how you guys doing? And I go, I don't feel so good. And I passed out right there, straight to the ground, and Dad caught me. And I woke up, and I'm like, what happened? You passed out, Michael. You passed out. Oh, my God. So that happens. But that's okay. So, Fran, as it turns out, we have a number of questions about the kind of car that you had.
My first
car
car.
you bought. What year was it? Who taught you how to drive? All these kind of things. So let's start with this question. What kind of car did your family have growing up?
The first car I can remember, and we have a picture of me sitting in my father's lap. My mother's in the car, was a Marmon. It was discontinued in 1933, and it was above, a little bit more spectacular than ordinary for
Yeah.
what a four-door sedan.
It was like an upgraded sedan.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And then my dad, I don't remember that. I just have a picture there. And then we had many, many trucks and had this big farm, and we all learned how to drive spray trucks, every kind of truck. And then later on, Dad had gravel plant, but that was after I had left home. I never got to be in any truck like that. But my mother had a penchant later on for cars. She had a little green Porsche. She had a Mercedes, and she had a
Well, she had a Mustang first of all.
well, yes, I'd forgotten that one.
Mustang, and then she had a Porsche 911, and then she had a Mercedes, and then she had a Jaguar.
Oh, the Jaguar was beautiful.
That's
It
right.
was a red convertible, and she would let me drive it down to the ocean on the coast, and I'd drive up in the big cliffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean in that convertible, feeling like I was queen of the world.
That must have been amazing.
And then when it would rain, we'd push the button and a little top would come over, and my mother would laugh. And
Now, this was when you went out there on your own to visit your mom.
When I would visit
way
my mother.
later.
That's right.
And I remember you saying that you wish you would have done that earlier because
Yes.
you had all this really great time
Yeah.
with your mother.
yes,
And it was just you two and maybe Nancy or Donna, but
that
but
car.
that was great.
There
You were able
weren't
to do
that many little Jaguars around then on the Oregon coast. And whenever we would stop, all the men would run out and want to look at the engine
Oh yeah.
in that Jaguar. Oh, what a beautiful
Well, that was
engine.
a V12, I think.
Yeah. And then the
pretty
demise
amazing
of
motor.
that little car, my mother one day was backing out of the garage. And somehow she zoomed forward instead of backwards.
Oh.
And she went in through the den,
No.
the house.
No. She was in the garage. The door was closed to the garage. She put it in reverse, went through the door, and then put it in drive and went into the house.
No, not that I remember.
That's how I remember it.
What I remembered, she had the door up and she was going to put in reverse to go out. Instead, she gunned it and went forward. Then she went zoom out through the garage door that was open
That's
and left marks on the driveway that lasted, skid marks for like 5 years. Well, she practically murdered that little Jaguar.
Is that how it happened?
And that's what I remember.
I thought she did the other way.
No.
She went through the door, crashed through the garage door, and then put it in drive,
No,
and then crashed
garage
through the house.
door was never hurt
Oh, okay.
or damaged. It was the inside of the house that she went
Well,
into.
maybe you're right. Maybe you're right. I don't know. Anyway.
And then years later, she sold the car to her jeweler who wanted it for his son.
Oh, that's great.
That little car. Well, really, I mean that big car.
Right. That was a big car. Big front end, anyway.
Yes.
With the engine. Anyway, so
Right,
I remember
right.
something that I want to mention that you talked about when all 6 of you kids were in a car, or maybe it was 3 of you kids, and your grandpa was driving around some of the curvy roads in Oregon, and one of the doors opened, and I think Alan almost fell out.
Oh,
of
that was
the-
over Crater Lake.
Okay.
Well, I remember when I was very young, and my brother Alan was about 4 or 5, and we visited Crater Lake in southern Oregon. This is where I think Mount Zuma blew up way back, and the island, the top came down as the island, which was Wizard Island. And it's one of the deepest lakes in the United States, in the world. So we were going down to, and at that time we were driving in a great big Packard. And I remember it had vases on the side above, like a hearse in a way. We had big vases above the doors in the back. And as we're driving along and they were putting up the barricade that was around the rim, They hadn't been installed by the state. My brother opened the car door handle and swung right out over the lake as
Oh,
we
my
were
God.
on the edge.
Oh, wow.
Well, my mother, fast as can be, grabbed him. She wasn't driving, Dad was. Somehow she grabbed him, got him inside, and then she spanked him so badly. My aunt, her sister, said he would have been better off if he would have hit the bottom of the Crater Lake.
Wow.
And no, it kind of scared the pants off
So
of
he was
all
hanging
of us.
out. As
He
the
was
door-
hanging on the doorknob, and there he was
The
hanging
car
on.
was going, and the door was open, and he was hanging by a doorknob
Yeah,
over
yeah.
Crater Lake.
Yep.
And if he
yep.
would have let go, he would have bit the dust.
He would have run down in the crater
Oh.
full of water by Wizard Island. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
But she pulled him in, and he was okay.
Oh, yeah. My mother had quick hands.
Well, that also reminds me of a story about grandfather, your dad. So when I think one of the times we were out there, I was 13 years old, and I was curious about driving cars and things like that. And of course, Dad wouldn't let me drive yet, but Grandpa would, because he had pickup trucks, and we went to go pick cherries and walnuts and do all kind of things that we weren't able to do at home because you had all there's 500 acres of farm, right? And so he let me drive his pickup, and I thought it was really cool. Hit the accelerator, and it was kind of like one of those cars that, wasn't like really smooth. You hit it, and it kind of jerked forward a little bit, and I kind of was starting to get the feel of that. It was an automatic, and we're going up the little hill by the lake, right behind the house. And I remember I hit the gas a little bit, and it kind of sputtered, and it didn't catch, and then the engine died, and then Grandpa's left foot went like a lightning rod right over to the brake. Bam! And I'm like, wow, that was good. Because otherwise we would have rolled into the lake, and then we started it and moved it from there. But we put it in park. I think he drove it the rest of the way. But anyway, I got a chance to drive a truck at 13. And of course, that reminds me of when Dad took me out driving before I had my permit or my license. I think I was maybe 15 before I got into driver's ed in school, because when Linda was in driver's ed, she hadn't been in a car before, and I think instead of the parking brake, she pulled the hood release, and there she is with the hood up in her class with all of these cars, embarrassed because she never had a chance to do that before. But those kind of things happen. But I think Dad said, I don't want that to happen to my son, so I'm going to make sure that I take him out and have him drive a little bit so he has a little bit of experience before he takes the class. And so here we are driving by Cosman Lake, and the forest is on my side and the lake is on Dad's side, and he's kind of looking at me as I'm driving, and all of a sudden there's a deer in front of the car, and oh my God, I hit him, boom. And maybe it was 30, 35 miles an hour, and it was a big deer. He went down, and I think he peed in front of the car, on the front of the car, and then he got up and he ran in the woods. And I'm like, I can't believe it. And he's like, of all times, it's got to come out here when you drive, and on and on and on. And then we get home, and you guys couldn't believe it. You took him out without a permit, and you hit a deer? Are you kidding? You could have been killed, and all this stuff. It wasn't that bad, but he did put a little dent on the car, and it took a little while for us to fix that. That was in that Nova, I think it was. But anyway, I'm glad he took me out, because now I have that story I can tell.
Well, getting back to my father, since we could drive on our 500 acres without licenses, and I was driving sprayer trucks, everything, we could drive. And he just give you the keys and says, follow me, and we drive in the orchard. And there was no official, you just learn. As an example, my younger brother Lee and my sister Nancy were about 9 and 11, and he asked them once, handed them the keys, here, take these walnuts to Bruner's dryer. Well, they were going to say, but Daddy, we don't drive. But if Daddy tells you drive to take those to the dryer, they did it.
Wow.
So it was about 14 miles away. They got up there. They clipped a bush or tree coming out, scared to death.
So who drove, Lee? Or
It was Lee. Lee was doing, I don't remember now really whether
Lee
it
or
was
Nancy,
Lee
they
or
were,
Nancy.
they were about the same age, right?
Yeah, but they were both scared to death.
About
But
11, 12, 13?
yeah, and they got home and they, oh, Dad, we did it. We hit something up there though. We had a little bit of a problem. And he wasn't all that concerned. You learned how to drive. If Dad said you knew how to drive, you would know how to drive.
So it's like sink or swim,
Yeah,
huh?
yeah.
Wow.
But anyway, getting back to,
So, Mom, one of the other questions was, who taught you to drive?
well, actually, who taught me first was my neighbor, Baidugo. Baidugo was the same mixture I was, German, English, Irish, French, married to a pure Italian. She had 6 little Italians and I had 5 little Italians. And Bai would take me out in her car. Well, it wasn't a car that you would brag about. You looked down and it had no floorboards. You could look right through and see the street,
Are you kidding?
the cement. But she took me out and did most of the teaching.
So how did you stop? Did you just put your foot down like Fred Flintstone?
No, you had the brakes. Everything worked in the car,
I'm
but
just
the
kidding.
floor wasn't there.
I'm just kidding.
Then Dad took me out into all the old parking lots at stores and taught me. And I didn't have my own car. This was borrowing, working in Dad's car. Then I went to get my license, thought I was ready, and we were going out to Elgin, which is this town that had the 2-foot curbs.
Oh.
I know very well because I hit practically every one of them when I was taking the test. And I was so positive. I took the morning off from my class, told them I was getting my license, went out there, and Jim is beaming. He knows I've made it, waving his hand up, and I'm like, don't know. So I was really upset. Here I told all those kids in my class I was getting my license, and I didn't. So I was so upset after that I went to change my clothes to go to school, and I had a phone on a desk, and as I buckled my dress on and put the belt around, I caught the phone to the cord in it and walked away and pulled the phone out of the wall,
Really?
which didn't make my husband very happy.
Are you serious?
No, yeah. Nope, it happened. I was so upset. And then I had to tell all the kids in the class that I didn't pass. Well, the next time I did.
Of course you
And
did.
then my first car was a blue Valiant.
I remember that car because it had the push-button transmission and it had a lever for the parking brake. It was really an odd kind of car, but I remember we had a Chevrolet wagon, right? We had a Country Squire Ford wagon with the paneling. We had a Ford Fairlane. We had a Pinto. We had a Ford Granada. Vince had an Acura.
Lori had the Pinto.
Lori had the Pinto. And then
And Linda
we had
had
a Grand Prix. Now let's talk about the Grand Prix. So your parents gave us that Grand Prix, and Dad and I flew to Oregon and drove that car back. And I remember driving back in the mountains
It was October.
where it was all snow, couldn't see a thing, and we thought we were going to die. And lo and behold, an 18-wheeler came by, and we got in his tracks, and we got out of there with the skin of our teeth, because otherwise we would have been in deep doo-doo. Can I say that? Doo-doo?
Yep, that was a good car.
Well, that's about it. Thanks for tuning in to Mike and Fran Unrehearsed at 216 The Net, and see you guys again next Wednesday.
Well, our chitter-chatter went rapidly today. We had a lot more things that we planned
Sure did.
to cover. Bye.